"Gabriel, we are from different worlds. This can't work." He stopped but didn't back away. His fingers lightly traced the line of her jaw, forcing her to look at him. "You can get away from everything, Clara. But not from me." Before she could respond, he moved even closer, their lips hovering just a hair's breadth away. The moment was charged with tension. The kind of tension that made the world around them disappear, leaving only the sound of their ragged breaths. And then, when it seemed like time had stopped, Gabriel whispered against her lips, "Tell her you don't feel this, and I'll leave now." The streets were wet from the light rain that had fallen during the morning. Clara pulled the hood of her worn coat as she looked for a place to shelter. His footsteps echoed across the empty sidewalks, and the weight of his old backpack felt heavier than usual. The cold was not just from the night, but from the feeling that the entire world had forgotten about her. It was then that she saw it. The tall, elegant woman stepped out of a shiny black car, balancing on high heels. Every movement felt calculated, as if he were performing for an invisible audience. She carried a small package in one hand and something flailing in a shipping crate in the other. Clara watched from afar, curious but suspicious. With an impatient gesture, the woman threw the package of dog food on the floor and opened the carrier. Out came a small, trembling dog. He looked at the woman with eyes that begged for an explanation. But she only muttered with an acidic smile, "Good luck, little one." Before Clara could react, the woman got back into the car and drove off without looking back. The sound of tires on the wet street seemed like an echo of abandonment. The dog remained motionless, its hair wet from the serene, visibly shaking. Clara hesitated. She already had so much to worry about. But when the little dog looked up at her, it was as if asking for help. She knelt slowly, holding out her hand. "Hey, it's okay. I won't hurt you." The animal took a hesitant step, then another, until it rested its cold nose against his hand. Clara smiled. "You were thrown away too, weren't you?" She took the food package and opened it carefully, dividing the dry food between her hands. The dog devoured it as if he hadn't eaten in days. Clara felt a tightness in her chest. "Come on, little one. Let's find a way." As she looked for a place to shelter, the dog began pulling on the improvised leash she had made from a piece of rope. "Hey, where are you going?" He looked determined. Curious, Clara decided to follow him. He crossed streets, entered alleys and stopped in front of a luxurious building with a shiny glass facade. Clara stopped, feeling out of place. The dog barked once as if it knew exactly where it was. The automatic glass door opened, and a tall man with an imposing posture appeared. He had tired eyes, the kind of tired that comes not from work but from something deeper. His suit was impeccable, but there was a slight mess in his hair, as if he had just run his hands through it repeatedly. He looked at Clara and then at the dog, who began to wag his tail frantically. "What are you doing with my dog?" he asked, his voice low but full of authority. Clara swallowed, holding the makeshift rope tightly. I found him on the street. A woman, she just abandoned him." The man's eyes narrowed. "A woman?" His jaw tensed and he ran his fingers through his hair again, this time with more force. Before Clara could continue, the dog ran up to him, jumping on his legs. The man bent down to pick it up, his face softening for a brief moment as he petted the animal. But when he looked back at Clara, there was something else in his eyes, a mix of suspicion and curiosity. "Come in," he said, opening the door wider. Clara hesitated. He noticed her reluctance and added, "You look like you need a place to warm up. And I want to know more about this woman." Clara took a hesitant step, crossing the threshold of a world that seemed so far from her own. As Clara enters the luxurious lobby, her eyes briefly meet his, and she feels that this meeting will be more important than it seems. Clara entered the building's lobby with hesitant steps, feeling the contrast between her reality and the luxury that surrounded her. The polished marble reflected her weathered silhouette, while the soft smell of something citrusy and expensive filled the air. She kept her arms crossed, as if trying to protect herself from the strangeness of that place. Gabriel walked ahead, the dog in his arms, without looking back. Clara couldn't help but notice his posture. Straight shoulders, firm walk. He exuded authority, but there was something else there. Something she couldn't quite put her finger on. "Wait here," he said without turning his face. He disappeared behind a door, leaving Clara alone in the lobby. She found herself looking at the abstract artwork hanging on the walls. Each piece seemed cold, calculated, almost like the owner of that place. Before he could get lost in thought, he returned, now without the dog but with a more direct look. "Tell me about this woman," Gabriel said, crossing his arms. His voice was firm but not aggressive. Clara took a deep breath, trying to organize her words. She looked rich, well-dressed, confident. He got out of a black car and simply left the dog with me. He threw a package of food on the floor and left. Gabriel frowned, his fingers drumming on his arm. Did she say something? Any name? Clara shook her head. No. He just wished good luck and left. The silence between them was heavy. Gabriel looked away for a moment as if processing something, and then asked, "Why did you follow him here?" The question caught her off guard. Clara looked down at her worn boots. I don't know. I think he knew where to go. And he looked as lost as I felt. Gabriel studied her for a long moment. There was something about Clara that intrigued him. It wasn't just his worn appearance or the way his hands always seemed to move nervously. It was the look in his eyes, a mix of determination and vulnerability. He doesn't go near strangers, he muttered, almost to himself. What makes you different? Clara looked up, surprised. Maybe because I also know what it's like to be abandoned? The sincere answer disconcerted him. Gabriel stepped back slightly, his expression hardening again. Wait here, he said once again, disappearing toward the elevator. Clara took the moment to catch her breath. She felt out of place, like a lost piece in a puzzle that was too luxurious for her. When Gabriel returned, he brought a small amount of money and a new collar. For the dog, he said, holding out the items. Clara looked at the collar and then at him. Are you sending me away? Gabriel frowned. No. I'm proposing something different. It seems like you have a way with him and I don't have the time. If you want, you can take care of him for a while. I'll pay. Clara blinked in surprise. Do you want me to take care of your dog? Gabriel shrugged, but there was something stiff about his movements. At least until I decide what to do. You need money, don't you? And he seems to trust you. There was a long silence before Clara responded. I accept. But only because he needs someone. Gabriel nodded, but his eyes watched her closely, as if trying to decipher something beyond the words. When Clara puts the collar on the dog, she notices an engraved inscription, "Forever faithful." The phrase intrigues her, but before she can ask, Gabriel says, "Early tomorrow in the same place," and disappears again. The next day began with Clara sitting on the same bench in the square where she had slept for the last time. The dog, now wearing a new collar, rested beside him. She held the money Gabriel had given her the day before, resisting the temptation to spend it. Early tomorrow in the same place, he had said, and Clara felt a mixture of anxiety and distrust. The sound of tires against asphalt caught his attention. The black car she recognized the day before stopped in front of the bank. Gabriel came down, wearing a white shirt and sunglasses, an image that seemed straight out of a fashion magazine. Clara adjusted her posture, instinctively hiding the money in her jacket pocket. Good morning, he said, taking off his glasses and watching the dog, who was now wagging his tail enthusiastically. It looks like he likes you, Clara commented, trying to sound casual. Gabriel gave a sideways smile, but his eyes were serious. I have some conditions, he said, gesturing for Clara to stand up. You will take care of the dog as he deserves. This means proper nutrition, regular walks and no neglect. Clara crossed her arms, feeling judged. I know how to take care of him. I don't need a manual. Gabriel raised an eyebrow. I hope so. He's been through a lot. His voice sounded softer, and Clara noticed for the first time a layer of sadness behind that cold facade. As they walked towards the car, Clara decided to ask, why does he have that inscription on his collar? Forever faithful. What does that mean? Gabriel paused for a moment as if considering whether or not to respond. It means that even when people fail, he doesn't fail. Dogs are different. Clara realized that there was more to that answer than he let on, but she chose not to insist. Instead, he followed Gabriel to the car where he opened the back door. The environment inside the vehicle was as impeccable as Gabriel. Clara felt out of place, but the dog seemed at home, settling comfortably in the seat. Where are we going? She asked as Gabriel put on his seat belt. You're going to need supplies if you want to take care of it properly, he replied without taking his eyes off the road. The pet store was bigger and more sophisticated than Clara imagined. As she hesitated at the entrance, Gabriel grabbed a shopping cart and began filling it with premium food, toys, and other items Clara didn't even know existed. That's an exaggeration, she muttered, but Gabriel ignored it. If you're going to take care of him, you're going to do it right, he said, handing Clara a new leash. When their hands briefly touched, Clara felt a strange shiver, but quickly shook the thought away. Later, as they walked back to the car with the bags, the dog started pulling Clara, trying to play with Gabriel. He crouched down to pet the animal, and the smile that appeared on his face seemed like a window into a more human side that he tried to hide. "He trusts you," Clara commented, observing the interaction. Gabriel looked up at her, his fingers still in the dog's hair. "And you? Do you trust me?" The question was direct, and Clara felt the impact of the words. She hesitated, looking away. "I don't know. But I'm willing to try." Gabriel nodded as if that was enough for now. He helped Clara put the items in the car, but before getting in he looked at her one more time. "There is something about you, Clara. Something the world has not yet destroyed. I hope it continues like this." On the way back, Clara notices that Gabriel is silent when they pass a park full of children playing. His distant gaze suggests painful memories, but before she can ask he says, "Come on. You have a new job to do." The small apartment that Gabriel had reserved for Clara was a few blocks from the main building. It was simple but clean, and infinitely better than anywhere Clara had slept in years. As she explored the space, the dog followed closely behind her, as if afraid she was going to disappear. Gabriel walked her to the door, watching as she opened the windows and looked around. "It's nothing grand," he commented, leaning against the doorframe. "But it's safe?" Clara nodded, trying to hide how much that gesture meant to her. "It is more than enough. Thanks." He was silent for a moment, eyes wandering around the small space before landing on her again. "Tomorrow we will review a routine for him. Food, tours, training. I want to make sure he has everything he needs." "Of course," Clara replied, keeping her voice steady. But as he spoke, his mind kept returning to the inscription on the dog's collar, "Forever faithful." When Gabriel turned to leave, Clara, almost without thinking, called him. "Why are you doing this? Don't tell me it's just about the dog." Gabriel stopped, his hand still on the doorknob. He didn't respond right away, and Clara saw his shoulders tense. Finally he turned around but didn't go through the door. "Sometimes people need a chance, Clara." Just that. Later that night, as Clara was preparing something to eat in the small kitchen, she heard a soft knock on the door. When he opened it, he found Gabriel holding a small bag. "I forgot to deliver this," he said, holding out the package. Inside was a soft blanket and a small bowl for the dog. Clara looked at the items, then at him, trying to find the right words. "Do you always do this? Help people like me?" He let out a short but humorless laugh. "No. In fact, this is news to me." The two were silent for a moment until Gabriel finally broke the mood, taking a step back. "I need to go. But if you need anything, you know where to find me." Clara waved, slowly closing the door. She felt the weight of the blanket in her hands, but also something else. A weight in her chest that she couldn't explain. The next day, Gabriel arrived early to start the dog's routine. As Clara tried to follow his detailed instructions, she couldn't help but notice how different he looked from the day before. Lighter, perhaps. There was even a moment when he smiled, something rare, but it made the atmosphere seem less charged. During a break, while the dog was playing on the lawn, Clara decided to ask something that was bothering her. "Yesterday when we passed by the park, you looked different. As if I were somewhere else." Gabriel didn't respond immediately. His eyes were fixed on the dog, but Clara saw his expression change. His lips pressed together, his jaw tense. "My sister used to take me there," he said finally. "Before everything fell apart." Clara was quiet, but her silence was an invitation for him to continue. Gabriel sighed. "She died a few years ago. Cancer. Since then, I think I've moved away from everything and everyone." The weight of his words hung in the air. Clara instinctively placed her hand on his arm. Gabriel looked at her, surprised but didn't back down. "I'm sorry," said Clara sincerely. "It's not something that's easy to overcome." For an instant, Gabriel's eyes softened. He looked at her hand on his arm, then at her face. "And you? What are you trying to overcome?" Clara hesitated but felt like she owed him something. "The loss of everything. From everyone." She gave a short but humorless laugh. "When you have nothing, you learn to hold on to the little things. Like a lost dog." Gabriel smiled, but there was something sad about that gesture. "I think we're more alike than I thought." Before Clara could respond, Gabriel took a step closer, looking straight into her eyes. "I know it's too early to say this, but maybe you're not as alone as you think." Clara didn't know exactly how she got into that situation. Sitting on the sofa next to Gabriel, with the dog between them, sharing a bottle of wine that he had brought by chance. The evening had started with a casual visit to check on his training progress, but it had turned into a conversation that flowed as naturally as the wine in the glasses. "So you really don't trust people?" Clara asked, a small smile playing on her lips. She watched Gabriel as he swirled the cup in his hand, his eyes fixed on the liquid as if searching for answers there. Let's just say I trusted the past too much, he replied, his voice low but full of meaning. People have a peculiar way of disappointing us. Clara was silent for a moment, trying not to think about her own disappointments. The dog, oblivious to the weight of that conversation, placed his head in Gabriel's lap, who began to automatically caress him. And you? He asked, looking away from her. It seems like you've been through a lot. She took a deep breath, fingers skimming the rim of her glass. I lost my parents when I was a teenager. After that, it was a free fall. One place to another, temporary jobs until there was nothing left. Life has a peculiar way of testing us. Gabriel looked at her for a long moment, his dark eyes reflecting something between compassion and understanding. He bowed slightly as if he wanted to say something important but was hesitating. Instead, he murmured, "You're stronger than you think." Clara looked away, feeling heat rise to her face. Or maybe I'm just pretending? The silence that followed was charged but not uncomfortable. Gabriel placed the glass on the table and got up, going to the window. Outside, the city lights twinkled, a reminder of the world that seemed so far away to both of them. Sometimes I wonder what it would be like to start from scratch, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Forget everything. The betrayals, the losses, and just moving on. Clara stood up, approaching hesitantly. She stopped next to him, just inches away. I think the past is always with us in some way, she said, looking at their reflection in the glass. But maybe that's what makes us who we are. Gabriel turned slowly, his eyes meeting hers. The dog barked softly in the background, but neither of them paid attention. The space between them seemed to shrink by the second, the weight of everything that wasn't being said enveloping them. You're right, he said, almost in a whisper. But perhaps, some things can be left behind. Claire didn't have time to respond. Gabriel raised his hand, gently, brushing his fingers across her face, brushing aside a strand of hair that fell into her eyes. The touch was gentle, but enough to send a shiver down her spine. You deserve better, he said, voice hoarse. And I want to believe that I can be that. Clara felt her breath catch. Gabriel's words were unexpected, but she couldn't deny the sincerity in his eyes. I don't know if I'm ready, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Neither do I, he replied with a small smile. But maybe we can find out together. The moment was interrupted by the dog, which jumped between them, barking as if claimed the center of attention. Clara laughed, breaking the tension, and Gabriel shook his head, smiling. I don't think he wants to share me with anyone. Sounds fair, Clara said, leaning over to pet the dog. But as she did so, her eyes met Gabriel's again, and she knew that something between them had changed. When Gabriel is about to leave, he hesitates at the door. Clara, you make me want to be different. And before she can respond, he's gone, leaving her alone with a whirlwind of emotions. Clara couldn't sleep that night. Gabriel's words, "You make me want to be different," echoed in his mind like an incessant refrain. What did he really mean? And why did it affect her so much? While the dog slept peacefully at the foot of the bed, Clara stared at the ceiling, trying to calm her whirlwind of thoughts. The next morning, Gabriel showed up at the usual time, but he looked different. He was more serious, as if something weighed on his shoulders. Clara noticed immediately but chose not to ask. The silence between them as they walked the dog wasn't uncomfortable, but there was an underlying tension, as if they were both waiting for the other to say something. Clara, he began, finally breaking the silence. I wanted to apologize for yesterday. She stopped, looking at him in surprise. For what? Gabriel ran a hand through his hair, something she was beginning to realize he did whenever he was nervous. For being so direct. I didn't want to put you in an uncomfortable position. Clara gave a small smile. You didn't put me anywhere, Gabriel. I'm just not used to people like you. He frowned, confused. Like me? People who care, she replied, her voice soft but full of meaning. Later, while Clara was organizing some things in the apartment, her cell phone rang. The number was unknown, but she answered anyway. The voice on the other end was cold, almost mechanical. Clara, don't forget that you have debts. There's no point in hiding. Her heart raced, and she instinctively glanced at the door, as if expecting someone to walk in at any moment. I'm trying to work it out, she replied, her voice shaking. We don't have all the time in the world, said the voice before hanging up abruptly. Clara stood still, the phone still in her hand, as panic spread through her body. She knew that phone call was a reminder that her past wouldn't disappear so easily. But more than that, he was afraid that Gabriel would find out. He was being so generous to her, and she didn't want him to know what a mess she was. When Gabriel arrived that night to check on the dog, he immediately noticed something was wrong. Clara tried to act normally, but her movements were more tense, and she avoided looking at him in the eyes. Gabriel, who was observant by nature, didn't let it go. "Clara, what happened?" he asked, crossing his arms. "Nothing," she replied quickly, but her voice shook slightly. Gabriel took a step closer, leaning in slightly to look straight into her eyes. "I know it's nothing. Talk to me." Clara felt tears starting to form, but she blinked them back quickly. "I'm just dealing with some things. It's not important." "It's important to me," he said, his voice firm but not commanding. "If you're in any kind of trouble, I need to know." She hesitated, but the sincerity in Gabriel's tone made her relent. I have some debts," she began, her voice shaking. "Things I did to survive when I had no other choice. And now these people are demanding me." Gabriel was silent for a moment, processing what he had just heard. Then, without saying a word, he went to the kitchen and got her a glass of water. "Take this. And now, tell me exactly what's going on." Clara explained everything, from the small loans she had taken out to the threats she had been receiving. Gabriel listened intently, his eyes growing darker with each detail. When she finished, he said, "Why didn't you tell me this sooner?" "Because it's not your problem," Clara replied, lifting her chin in a defensive gesture. "You have already done so much for me. I don't want you to think I'm using you." Gabriel gave a short, humorless laugh. "Clara, do you think this is charity? I trust you. And I trust you would do the same for me if the positions were reversed." Clara's eyes widened, surprised by his frankness. Gabriel took a step forward, further closing the space between them. "You need to understand something," he said, voice softer now. "I'm not helping you because I think you're weak. I'm helping you because you're strong. Strong enough to admit she needs help." Clara didn't know what to say. Before she could respond, Gabriel placed his hand on her shoulder, a gesture that seemed both comforting and trusting. "Let me take care of this. I know people who can resolve this legally. And I won't let anyone hurt you." "Why?" she asked, almost in a whisper. "Why do you care so much?" Gabriel hesitated, as if searching for the right words. "Because you remind me that there are still good things in this world." As Gabriel leaves to make a call, Clara watches his silhouette through the window, feeling torn between gratitude and something deeper that she still can't name. Clara woke up early that morning, but the weight of the conversation with Gabriel was still on her shoulders. He had promised to help, but she knew her debts weren't just financial. They were reminders of a past she'd rather forget. As the dog slept next to the bed, Clara stared at the ceiling, wondering how she had let things get to this point. The sound of a knock on the door brought her out of her thoughts. When he opened it, he found Gabriel holding a folder and a determined expression. "We need to talk," he said, walking in without waiting for an invitation. "About what?" asked Clara, still groggy from sleep. "About how we're going to resolve this," he replied, placing the folder on the table. "I spent the night talking to some people I trust. We can settle your debts, but you need to tell me exactly who we are dealing with." Clara felt a lump form in her throat. "I don't know. I don't want to involve you." Gabriel looked at her, his eyes fixed on hers. "You already involved me. Now it's too late to turn back." They spent the morning reviewing the information, with Clara retelling stories she would rather forget. With each detail, Gabriel became darker, but he didn't interrupt her. When they were done, he sighed, running a hand through his hair. "These people aren't just loan sharks," he said finally. "They are criminals. This won't be easy, but I'll deal with it." Clara felt a tightness in her chest. "Gabriel, I can't let you do this. What if something goes wrong?" He smiled, but it was a bitter smile. "Believe me, I've dealt with worse people. You have no idea what some business people can do." Before she could respond, the dog barked, distracting them. Gabriel bent down to pet the animal, but Clara noticed that his hands were shaking slightly. Despite his confidence, he was worried, and that scared her more than any threat. Later, Gabriel left to find a contact who he believed could help them. Clara was left alone in the apartment, trying to concentrate on anything, but her mind kept coming back to him. There was something about the way Gabriel took on his problems that made her question why he cared so much. As night fell, Clara heard footsteps in the hallway. The door opened and Gabriel walked in, looking more tired than ever. There was a small cut on his forehead and his tie was loose. Clara ran to him, her heart racing. "What happened?" she asked, holding his face to examine the wound. "It was nothing," he said, walking away gently. "Just a little setback." Clara didn't believe it but decided not to pressure him. Instead, he took a damp cloth and wiped it silently. Gabriel lay still, letting her take care of him, his eyes watching her every move. "Why do you do this?" he asked, finally breaking the silence. "Do what?" Clara replied without looking at him. Mind, he said, voice barely above a whisper. With someone like me? Clara stopped, her hand still holding the cloth. She looked at him, her eyes reflecting more than she cared to admit. Because I see something in you, Gabriel. Something you try to hide. You want to help people, but you're afraid to let someone help you. He laughed, but it was a bitter laugh. Maybe you're right. The two were silent for a moment until Gabriel leaned in slightly, his eyes fixed on hers. You are different, Clara. I don't know how to explain it, but it's like you made me believe that there is still something good in this world. Clara felt her heart race, but before she could respond, Gabriel walked away, breaking the moment. Rest, he said, his voice firm again. Tomorrow we will have more work to do. When Clara went to sleep that night, she heard Gabriel talking on the phone in the hallway. Her words were muffled, but she managed to catch one phrase that made her uneasy. If they get anywhere near her, I'll end everything. The next morning arrived with a heavy silence in Clara's apartment. She stood up slowly, feeling the air thick with unspoken concern. Gabriel had left early without giving details, leaving only a message on the counter. Take care of the dog. I will be back soon. Clara held the note for a few seconds before putting it in her pocket, an uncomfortable feeling growing in her chest. The dog seemed to sense the tension, leaning against her legs as if seeking comfort. It's okay, kid, she murmured, kneeling down to stroke his soft fur. We will get through this. Together. Later, as Clara walked through the park with the dog, a cool breeze ruffled her hair. But even the tranquility of the environment couldn't keep his thoughts away. She knew Gabriel was dealing with something dangerous, and the idea that he could get hurt because of her was unbearable. He sat on a bench, the dog lying at his feet, and looked up at the sky. It was hard to believe that just a few weeks ago her life was completely different. She had no home, no one to trust, and no hope for a future. Now, Gabriel had entered her life like a hurricane, changing everything. Do you think he's okay? She asked, more to herself than to the dog. As if understanding, the animal raised its head and looked in the direction of the building where Gabriel lived. Clara smiled slightly. You're smarter than you look, you know that? When Gabriel finally returned, it was already night. Clara was in the kitchen trying to prepare something to eat, but dropped everything as soon as she heard the door open. He looked exhausted, but there was something about his posture that indicated things were under control. Everything resolved? She asked, unable to hide the anxiety in her voice. For now, he replied, taking off his jacket and throwing it on the couch. But we need to talk. Clara nodded, sitting at the table while Gabriel got a glass of water. He seemed to choose his words carefully before speaking. I managed to negotiate with the men who were threatening you. They won't bother you anymore, he began. Clara felt immediate relief, but he continued, but this is not permanent. They hope you disappear for a while. We need to make sure you are safe. Safe? Repeated Clara, confused. What does that mean? It means you might want to leave town for a while, Gabriel said, his eyes fixed on hers. Clara felt a tightness in her chest. The idea of leaving everything, leaving Gabriel, was something she hadn't considered. And you? Are you staying here? Gabriel hesitated before answering. I have things I need to resolve. But you are my priority now. His words hit her like a punch. There was something about the way he spoke, as if he was admitting something deeper than just concern. Gabriel? Why are you doing all this for me? He was silent for a moment, his fingers drumming on the table. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, almost a whisper. Because you remind me of what's important. And because I don't want to lose you. Clara felt her heart accelerate, but before she could respond, Gabriel got up and went to her. He stood beside you, his presence dominating the small space. You don't need to say anything, he said, bowing slightly. I just want you to know that I'm here. I always will be. The moment seemed eternal. Clara could feel his breath so close, and the warmth of his hand as he placed it lightly over hers. She didn't move away. Instead, she looked directly into Gabriel's eyes, finding something there that made her feel safe for the first time in years. I trust you, she said finally. Gabriel gave a small smile but said nothing more. Instead, he moved even closer, until the two of them were so close that it seemed impossible to ignore the attraction between them. When he finally kissed her, it was soft, almost tentative, as if he were afraid of crossing some line. But Clara didn't back down. She knew this moment was inevitable, and for the first time she didn't feel afraid to let someone in. When Clara wakes up the next morning, Gabriel had already left again, but left a message on the bathroom mirror. The world can still be good. Don't forget that. Clara stared at the message in the mirror for a long time. Gabriel's words echoed in his mind like a promise and at the same time a challenge. The world can still be good. As much as she wanted to believe, a part of her continued to fight doubt. She didn't know if the world had room for her or if she was just living on loan, something that would eventually be taken away. As she prepared coffee, the dog sat next to her, his eyes attentive as if he was waiting for her to speak. Clara smiled at him. "Guess it's just the two of us again, kid. What do you think of that?" The dog tilted his head and Clara laughed, but there was something about his laugh that seemed different, lighter, as if the weight he was carrying had lessened a little. Gabriel was doing something no one else had managed, showing that maybe, just maybe, she could have a future. That afternoon, Clara received a message from Gabriel, "I'll be home for dinner. Get ready to leave." She reread the words several times, trying to decipher the meaning. He didn't give details, but there was something about the simplicity of the invitation that made her nervous. When Gabriel arrived, he was dressed more casually, something rare for him. A light blue shirt with rolled-up sleeves and well-fitting jeans. Clara realized that she had never seen him so relaxed, and that made her smile. "Ready?" he asked, holding the dog's leash. Clara nodded, but her curiosity was written all over her face. "Where are we going?" she asked as they headed to the car. Gabriel gave an enigmatic smile. "Trust in me." They drove for about half an hour until Clara recognized the place, the park where they had walked for the first time. It was nighttime and streetlights cast soft shadows on the trees. Gabriel parked and opened the door for her and the dog. When Clara came downstairs, the cool night air enveloped her, and she knew there was something special about that moment. "I thought it would be nice to go back to where it all started," said Gabriel, holding the leash as the dog ran ahead. Clara looked at him, surprised. "Do you remember that?" "I remember everything," he replied, his voice serious. "From the moment you showed up at that door, holding my dog, with that look on your face like you didn't know whether to trust me or run." Clara laughed, shaking her head. "I was completely lost." "And now?" he asked, stopping and turning to her. "Is it still?" She was silent for a moment, staring into his eyes. "I don't think so. But this has a lot to do with you." Gabriel took a step closer, the dog now sitting a few meters away as if respecting the moment. "Clara, I know that not everything was easy. For none of us. But I want you to know that it wasn't just for you that I did all this. It was for me too." Clara frowned, confused. "What do you mean?" Gabriel took a deep breath, his eyes never leaving hers. "You gave me something I didn't know I needed, purpose. Before you, I was just existing. Doing what I needed to do but not feeling anything. You changed that." Clara felt tears forming, but she didn't try to hide them. "Gabriel, you gave me something I never thought I would have. Hope. And that means everything to me." He smiled, the kind of smile that seemed to light up the night. "Then we're even." They both laughed, but the moment was interrupted when the dog started barking and running in circles around them. Gabriel bent down, picking the animal up, and Clara did the same, approaching. While they were there together, Clara realized something. For the first time, she wasn't thinking about the past or the future. Just at that moment. Before they left the park, Gabriel looked at Clara with an expression she couldn't decipher. "I want to show you something tomorrow. Something that could change everything." The next morning, Clara woke up with a mix of anticipation and nervousness. Gabriel's words from the night before, "something that can change everything," echoed in his mind. The dog, as always, was attentive to her every move, wagging his tail as if he knew something important was about to happen. Shortly afterwards, Gabriel arrived, more punctual than ever. He wore a fitted blazer and a white shirt, but his expression was relaxed. There was a calm energy about him that Clara hadn't seen before, as if this day was as important to him as it was to her. "Ready?" he asked, extending his hand. Clara looked at his hand for a moment before taking it. "I still don't know what I'm preparing for, but yes. I'm ready." The trip was marked by comfortable silence. Gabriel seemed focused and Clara, despite being curious, didn't want to interrupt his thoughts. After some time, the car stopped in front of an imposing but welcoming building with a carefully maintained garden. "What place is this?" Clara asked, looking out the window. Gabriel smiled slightly but didn't respond immediately. He got out of the car, walked around and opened the door for her. "Come with me. I want you to see it with your own eyes." Clara followed Gabriel to the building's entrance, where a receptionist greeted them warmly. The man seemed to know Gabriel, but he didn't ask any questions. They climbed in silence to the third floor. When the elevator door opened, Clara saw a long hallway decorated with pictures and plants. Gabriel walked to a door at the end, opened it and gestured for Clara to enter. The space was lit by large windows that let natural light flood the room. There was simple but elegant furniture and everything looked new. Clara took a few hesitant steps before turning to Gabriel. "What is that?" she asked, confused. Gabriel put his hands in his pockets and gave a small smile. "It's your new home." Clara was silent, processing the words. "My house?" he repeated in disbelief. "Yes," he replied, walking over to her. "I want you to have a place where you feel safe. A place to start over." The tears began to flow before Clara could stop them. "Gabriel, I don't know what to say. I cannot accept this." "You can," he said, holding her hands. "And it will. It's not a gift. It's an opportunity. You deserve." Clara looked at him, trying to find the right words. "Why are you doing this? Why do you care so much about me?" Gabriel took a deep breath, his eyes fixed on hers. "Because you saved something in me that I thought was lost. You gave me a reason to believe again. And now I want to do the same for you." The silence that followed was full of unspoken emotions. Clara stepped forward, her eyes shining with tears. "You are the most incredible person I have ever met, Gabriel. And I don't know how I'll be able to repay that." "No need to reciprocate," he said, his voice soft. "Just live. Be happy. That's enough." Later, as Clara explored the apartment with her dog by her side, she found a note on the table. It was from Gabriel. "The world gave you reasons to give up. Now I want to give you reasons to believe. You are no longer alone." Clara felt a smile form as she held the note. For the first time she believed it. Clara and Gabriel are sitting in the building's garden, watching the dog run across the lawn. The sun is setting, painting the sky with shades of orange and pink. Gabriel holds Clara's hand, intertwining her fingers with his. "I don't know what the future holds," said Clara, looking at the horizon. "Neither do I," replied Gabriel, gently squeezing her hand. "But I know I want you in it." The dog runs towards them, barking happily, and Clara laughs as she hugs him. In that moment, she knows she has found more than safety or a home. She has found something she never expected: love and hope. Do you also believe that love can arise in the most unlikely moments and transform lives in unimaginable ways? If this story touched your heart and made you believe in the power of destiny, leave a comment below and share your reflections. Every like and share is a powerful gesture to bring this message of overcoming and hope to more people. And if you want to continue following stories as exciting as this, subscribe to the channel now and activate the bell to never miss an episode of this journey full of emotions and twists. Is one click away to change lives, including yours. Let's go together?